We are now joined by Dr. Shakira Choonara, an activist and award-winning public health practitioner. Dr. Shakira has been on my program before, and she's no new face to Salam Media, but always a pleasure to talk to you. And because you're so proactive, it's always important for us to keep up with what you're doing. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program, Shakira.
Welcome, Salam Najma, to you and your listeners. It's always a pleasure to check in with Salam Media.
hmm Now, today's discussion is on a letter that you penned to the president, an open letter, which was then printed in the Daily Maverick, right? And I'm just going to read the first line and then we'll discuss what you've written. Dear President Cyril Ramaphosa and comrades, I doubt you will read this. I doubt you will care. I doubt you will or do anything. But I do want to raise my voice in any way I possibly can. Now, that statement, that opening statement, already gives us a sense of the deep disappointment, perhaps even anger. And we all need some avenue to express ourselves. And I like that you've chosen to do this, and this is not the first time. So what what was the motivation for writing this particular letter?
You know, Najma, the one is I found it significant to write it during Youth Month last year, and I shared it as my reflection of 2023 because even though I don't know if the circles in the ANC had read this or not, I do know that many South Africans had read this, and I'm really excited about that because I think it's about time that us as like-minded South Africans start to think about rebuilding our country. What was going through my mind at that point is, you know, I'm quite fortunate to live and work across the African continent and across the world in global health. And I go to different settings and I see different things. So, for example, when I'm at Addis Ababa airport in Ethiopia, you see tons of planes which are owned by the Ethiopian government. It's national pride. You see the pyramids of Giza written on one of the planes. You see Victoria Falls written on another plane. And the Ethiopian government has built this in recent years. You then see so much more development. You see so much more happening across the world. And you come back home to South Africa, where I wrote in the letter, you know, it's next to impossible for me as a digital worker and a remote worker to be able to function with the load shedding, with the internet connection. I can't even get onto Microsoft Teams. I can't do shared documents with people who are sitting in the United States. And so that is a hindrance for me as someone being employed within the sector. And you know, just driving around, seeing the massive heaps of litter, seeing the total degradation of South Africa had really, really angered me and had really, really disappointed me. And that was the point where I said, I want to make my voice heard in South Africa.
Right. Now, you know, when you say you addressed this during the time of, Youth Month in South Africa, and you've said that 40 years later, you and your comrades have taken away the future of young South Africans. And what's really scary is that they're leaving.
Yeah, I mean, I took a few Lancet Youth Commissioners on adolescent health to Robben Island in December. We were up in Cape Town for a meeting. And, you know, Najma, you have such an appreciation because I came across this poster on the 1976 uprising. And I think that is so far away that sometimes it leaves our consciousness, right? And it was nice to have this reminder where we had young people in the country who were shot at, Hector Peterson and so many others who were shot at. And when we now look 40 years later, we're seeing the scenes in Gaza where children are being shot at and murdered. So it's very similar, right? But besides that, you have this appreciation of, and I had honestly put it deep in my subconscious, and I remembered it because we're talking about youth activism and health. We're talking about youth changing things, and my visit to Robben Island had reminded me that actually an excellent example of youth activism in South Africa's history is the 1976 uprising, and it created a turning point and a shift globally as well. And we now look 40 years later, and many of those comrades or veterans or whoever it is are they proud of what's happened? I mean, you literally gave your life, you were part of the struggle. How do you sleep at night? That's my question.
And the deterioration is, it's so sad, and not everyone can just pack up and leave, and that's not the answer anyway. We
No,
should stay and fight, right? I mean, this activist in you would obviously give us a sense of what it is that we can do apart from what you've done here, which is great, because I'm sure many have resonated with what you've said. However, the youth is where we depend on some sort of change for the future.
I think there's a multi-pronged approach, Najma. And I was actually at Africa's CDC, Centers for Disease Control conference with young people, 200 or so young people across the world in December as well, end of November in Zambia. And I had said to the young people that, let's stay in Africa. Let's build Africa. Let's hold on as much as we can. The solution is not to leave. And I myself, I'm trying to hang on and still keep Johannesburg and South Africa as my home base. But as an employed person operating in a digital economy, it's extremely difficult. It's not easy. It's not. I mean, and I'm part of those who are employed. What about those who can't join the gig economy as well? So that's the first thing. Some of the solutions I have, and they're nothing out of the ordinary, I believe. But the one is, many people have started to devalue the voting process. And I think it's very important for
Right.
all of us to go to the voting polls this year and make our voices heard. I know it's not easy. I personally don't think there's any political party that completely resonates with me as yet, but let's go and make our voices heard. The first thing, that vote is quite powerful, and I think we need to make use of our democracy. The
Mm.
second is going back to that thinking of the Mandela generation and the Kathrada generation, which I think is so powerful, Najma, and it
You're
inspires
right.
me until today. Because if you look at the wars that's going on in Israel and Palestine and all across the world, all across Africa as well, you see that value in democracy, in moral leadership, in being visionary, in being non-racial as well. And I
Right.
think that's something we as South Africans, especially my generation, but there's a newer generation now as well, we need to think about how do we go back to that? How do we build that? How do we really build South Africa on that really strong foundation that we were granted in 94?
Right. And I think one of the reasons is because we lack national pride. And we don't have national pride, as you've rightly pointed out, that just on at airports you see how proud the nation is of their landmarks, as it were. Are we as South Africans proud? I beg your pardon.
I mean, I can't speak for all South Africans, but I do know in the conversations I've had and the spaces I've been is recent happenings have led us to lose our national pride. I do think the loss of South African Airways is a loss not to South Africa, but to connecting the African region. So that is a significant loss. The load shedding slash ESCOM debacle is something which has hit South Africans in every part of life, whether it's your home, whether it's when you're on the road, whether it's in your recreation spaces, your religious spaces, even operating in the dark as well, your workspaces. And I think that has led to a significant loss of national pride. But I think that there's so much for us to remind ourselves about. And yes, the rugby was great, but I think also myself just getting to travel the country again and seeing how beautiful it is. It's truly beautiful. And so
Absolutely.
how do we instill that national pride again? How do we say we cannot accept that we're living with litter around us? That's not acceptable. You can have a really clean house inside, but outside, if it's looking that way, I think we all have a responsibility to build up this national pride again. I don't think the current leadership will.
So then, is it not up to us also to take on that initiative to build in a way where we just don't depend on everyone else to do it?
If I had my way, I probably wouldn't even have politicians because I'm not sure what their role is in society as I go through life. But of course, we do have a system where we have a political system, and across the world, it's not just South Africa. So one is we have to push accountability. We can't just
Mm.
leave it. And I think as South Africans, we've left it for too long. we we normalizing a lot of things. We're normalizing
Right.
the person at the robots or the traffic lights who's directing traffic. That's not normal. We cannot accept this, you know. So one
Yeah,
is accountability, but two, I think it's us as citizens driving that accountability, and where the state is failing, be able to fill those gaps.
correct. You are an activist in the public health sector. I know you're extremely passionate about that. What can we do there? I mean, how are you feeling about that?
You know, I think for me, it's deep disappointment in the way things are going. Um, we look good on paper as South Africa. So when we compare to the rest of Africa, we have a high number of healthcare workers. We have a high number of or a high number of service or high rate of service coverage, et cetera, right? So we still have some infrastructure. We still have some sort of investment in the public healthcare system in place. But again, we're seeing this complete degradation of the state
Hmm.
playing out in the healthcare sector. I think that it's a loss to humanity. The fact that patients no longer, or they're struggling to get food in the system. There's reports of no water in healthcare facilities. That's the basics of sanitation and good healthcare. So for me, the public healthcare system has broken. I'm extremely disappointed at, you know, around that. It's also difficult, you know, it's easy to criticize, but it's more difficult to be able to solve. Yes, we see gift of the givers filling gaps across the country in the healthcare sector, but that's not the healthcare sector essentially. So I'm at a point where I think I'm quite disappointed, both at the implementation level, the service delivery level, but I'm also slightly worried at the policy level. And that's where we see the NHI bill being passed. And to be honest, um, my opinion is that it was passed because that's what the ANC has to show ahead of the elections, and that's
Hmm.
not what the NHI is. So, yes, I'm excited that it's passed, but I'm worried that it's going to mean double taxation, that is going to strain the middle class. I'm also worried that the NHI will not really move beyond paper.
Yeah, that is a discussion for another day. Shakira, did you feel a little relieved after you've written this? Of course, if we are discussing it today, so I'm glad you put it out there. What other expectation do you have, if at all?
Well, you know, I won't lie to you. I was contemplating, do I do this? Don't I do this? I did do this eventually, of course, in the many roles and positions that I have. It's not easy to come out publicly and criticize, but at the end of the day, I wrote this in my personal capacity, and I believe that as a young leader, or as a leader, because I'm not that young anymore, but I believe that as a leader, when you stop speaking out, that's when you sacrifice your leadership, or your morals and your ethics. And so I'm extremely glad that I wrote this. I didn't expect that it would resonate so widely, and I'm glad that it did. And I hope that it helps to shape us, one, to go out to vote, and two, to consider. I mean, it's a difficult decision. Who do we put our vote for the next 4 years? It's not so much a relief. I guess I'm also shocked at the anger that I felt. And it's about thinking about, you know, how do we channel this anger that we have as South Africans? How do we channel everything that's broken and try and make it better?
Well, being in your position, I think it's a very productive way of channeling your anger. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and being bold enough to come back up and talk to us about it.
Najma, always brilliant to speak to you, and thank you for the platform and also the contribution to trying to make South Africa a better place.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. That was Dr. Shakira Choonara, activist and award-winning public health practitioner. Next up, we speak to the president of the United Movement in Cape Town and city councillor, Neil de Beer.